How do we know that the New Testament has been corrupted over time? Today we'll show you a simple example. The first book of the New Testament is generally referred to as the Gospel of Matthew. This, however, has not always been the case. The earliest manuscript evidence of this gospel has no name or title given to it. In fact, the original title of this gospel didn't refer to itself as a gospel at all. The real title of the Gospel of Matthew was actually the first line of the document, which when read says, "The Book of the Genealogy of Jesus Christ." That's it. No mention of it being a gospel, no mention of any Matthew being an author. 100 years later, in the 4th century CE, a later anonymous editor added a title to an already published manuscript of the New Testament. They went to each of the first 4 books of the New Testament and added a title to the start of each book. This is when the title, according to Matthew, is historically known to have been used in any published edition of the New Testament as a title for the first gospel. Here we see the identification of the author in a published edition for the first time. This identification comes roughly 300 years after Christians believe this document was first written. 100 years later, in the 5th century, we see the title being changed again. This time the title reads as the Gospel according to Matthew. 400 years later in the 9th century, we see the final change as we know it today. The title for the first book of the New Testament now reads, The Holy Gospel according to Matthew. As we have just seen, in a span of 700 years, the title for the first book of the New Testament has evolved significantly over time. This table simplifies things quite a bit. It's gone from having no explicit title and no author to having an author, to then having both an author and being described as a gospel, to then finally being described as a holy gospel by a well-known author. And this is just the first line of the New Testament. Can you imagine how many more changes were made?